In the multiverse, demons have hierarchies. Angels have mandates. Gods have jurisdictions. Every universe, no matter how chaotic, operates within a framework, a set of rules that even the most powerful beings implicitly obey. Power has a ceiling. Monsters have a taxonomy. Even the most ancient evil can be classified, catalogued, and eventually, if you're skilled enough or crazy enough, destroyed. But what happens when something falls through that doesn't have entry in any taxonomy? Something that predates classification. Something that looks at a universe's rules the way a man looks at a speed limit sign, aware of its existence, mildly amused by its optimism, and entirely uninterested in compliance. Redgrave City had already survived the Qliphoth. It had already watched a tree made of human blood grow tall enough to blot out the sun, watched demons pour through like water through a broken dam, watched 3 of the most powerful beings on the planet carve through apocalypse like it was a Tuesday. The city had scars. It had rebuild efforts. It had a population that had collectively decided that therapy was cheaper than moving. It was not, by any reasonable metric, ready for what came next. The rift opened at 2:17 in the morning on a Wednesday, which was, if nothing else, consistent with Redgrave's tradition of catastrophe arriving at the least convenient possible moment. It didn't announce itself with theatrical light or demonic roaring. It simply appeared above the intersection of Vester and Crone, a vertical tear in the fabric of local reality, roughly the shape of a doorway, and roughly the color of a bruise. The air around it tasted like copper and old churches and something else entirely. Something that made the 3 demons loitering on the corner below go very, very still. Demons, as a species, are not easily frightened. They are creatures of appetite and violence and ancient cruelty, and fear is generally something they inflict rather than experience. But these 3, a pair of Empusa and a scarlet Alto Angelo that had survived the Qliphoth incursion by being cowardly enough to hide, felt something move through the rift before anything physical emerged. Not power, exactly. Not demonic energy. Something older than either of those words. Something that brushed against their instincts like a thumb dragged across a razor blade. The Alto Angelo took 1 step backward. Then Alucard fell through. He didn't fall dramatically. He didn't arrive in a column of shadow or a burst of hellfire. He simply came through the rift the way a man steps off a curb. Casually, 1 foot at a time, his long red coat settling around him as gravity reacquainted itself with his existence. He landed on the pavement with the sound of good leather and quiet confidence, straightened up to his full height, and took a long, slow look at Redgrave City. The rift closed behind him without ceremony. For a moment, nothing moved. The Empusa were frozen. The Alto Angelo had stopped breathing, which was impressive given that it didn't technically need to. Alucard stood in the amber wash of a street light that was doing its level best to illuminate something it fundamentally wasn't equipped to handle. Then he turned his head slowly, taking in the architecture, the demon-carved damage still visible on building facades, the blood-brown stains on the pavement that no amount of municipal cleaning had fully erased. His glasses caught the light. Beneath them, his eyes were the color of fresh arterial spray. He said. One of the Empusa, operating on the self-preservation instinct of the terminally stupid, lunged. What happened next was not a fight. A fight implies 2 parties with meaningful agency. What happened was closer to an object lesson, brief, instructive, and deeply unpleasant for everyone involved who wasn't Alucard. Shadow erupted from beneath his coat, like it had been waiting for permission. The Empusa ceased to exist as a coherent entity before it completed its arc, whilst the second one managed a full half-second of reconsidering its life choices before the same fate found it. The Alto Angelo, to its credit, actually raised its shield. Alucard looked at the shield. He looked at the Angelo behind it. He smiled. The full smile, the one that had no business existing on a human face. "Oh," he said. "You're trying." The Alto Angelo did not survive the compliment. Alucard stood in the sudden silence, 3 piles of dissolving demonic matter at his feet, and returned his attention to the city. He rolled his neck once. He reached into his coat and produced a wine glass from somewhere that should not have had room for a wine glass, examined it thoughtfully, and then put it back. "Different," he said, to no one in particular. "Not what I expected." But then, he tilted his head toward the distant skyline, toward the faint residual energy signatures that a city this damaged couldn't fully mask, toward something that his senses, honed across centuries of slaughter, was already beginning to triangulate. Nothing interesting ever is. Somewhere across the city, in a building with a neon sign that had seen better decades, a phone rang. If you want to see more crossover battles and unexpected universe collisions, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and universe you'd want to see in the comments below. Let's explore the infinite together. Alucard began to walk. His footsteps made no sound. The streetlights flickered as he passed beneath them, each one struggling and failing to do its job in his proximity, as if the light itself was uncertain whether illuminating him was a good idea. Around him, Redgrave continued its restless, almost sleep. Sirens distant, wind moving through demon-scarred streets, the city breathing with the particular rhythm of a place that had survived too much to be surprised anymore. It would be surprised. 2 blocks away, a surviving demon pressed itself against a wall and made a sound no human throat could replicate. A frequency below hearing, a distress signal broadcast across demonic channels to anything powerful enough to receive it. The message was simple, urgent. 3 words that hadn't been transmitted in this city since the Qliphoth closed. Something is here. The phone in Devil May Cry had a particular ring for mundane jobs. Cats in trees, haunted appliances, the occasional cursed antique that a Redgrave antique dealer had absolutely known was cursed when they bought it, but had purchased anyway because the price was right. It had a different ring for demon activity. And it had a 3rd ring, one that Dante had installed himself, connected to a sensor array that Nico had built from salvaged Qliphoth-adjacent technology and 3 energy drinks worth of inspiration. For when something set off every alarm simultaneously, and none of the readings made any sense. That 3rd ring had never gone off before tonight. Dante was asleep on the couch when it started, which was less a testament to his irresponsibility and more a testament to the fact that the couch was genuinely comfortable, and the pizza he'd eaten at midnight had been exceptional. He was awake before the 2nd ring completed, feet on the floor, hand already reaching for ebony and ivory with the automatic competence of someone whose nervous system had long since decided that conscious thought was an unnecessary middleman in emergency response. He looked at the sensor panel. He looked at it for a long moment. Every indicator was spiking, not in the way they spiked for demon surges. That was a clean red line climbing steadily up a scale he and Nico had calibrated together. This was something different. The demonic energy reading was negative, not 0. Negative, and as if whatever was out there was so fundamentally not demonic that the sensor, built to measure demonic presence, was registering its absence as a quantity in itself. The divine energy reading was equally flat. The 3rd column, the one Nico had labeled MISC/unknown because she was nothing if not honest about the limits of her instrumentation, was so far into the red it had stopped displaying numbers and was simply showing a string of characters that Dante was fairly certain weren't supposed to appear on this particular screen. "Huh," Dante said. He holstered ebony and ivory, picked up Rebellion from where it leaned against the desk, with the comfortable familiarity of a man retrieving an umbrella, and rolled his shoulders once. He was already wearing his coat. He slept in the coat sometimes, which was either deeply cool or deeply concerning depending on who you asked. And the night air outside when he pushed through the door was cool and carrying something on it. Something that made the back of his neck do a thing it hadn't done in a while. Not quite a threat response, not quite recognition. Something closer to curiosity. His demonic senses reaching out and finding an edge they couldn't see past. Like running your hand along a wall in the dark and discovering it goes further than the architecture should allow. He followed it west, toward Vester and Crone, moving at a pace that ate distance without looking hurried. Red Grave at night had its own rhythms. Demon patrols were still a reality in the outer districts. Stragglers from the Qliphoth incursion that hadn't been cleaned up yet, and low-level haunts that filled the power vacuum left by the bigger player's destruction. Dante moved through it the way water moves through a landscape, finding the path of least resistance, not out of caution, but out of efficiency. There was something specific tonight. Everything else was noise. He smelled it before he saw the aftermath. Blood, yes. Demon blood had a particular iron and sulfur quality that was distinct from the human variety. But underneath that, something else. Something ancient in a way that the demon lords he'd killed had never quite managed to be. They were ancient the way old buildings were ancient, long-standing, accumulated, heavy with history. This was ancient the way geology was ancient, the way a fossil was ancient. Something that had existed so long that existence itself had become a habit rather than a condition. The 3 piles of dissolving demonic matter at the Vester-Crone intersection told a straightforward story. The manner of dissolution told a less straightforward one. Dante crouched beside the closest pile, former Impusa, judging by the residual energy signature, and studied it with the particular focused attention he reserved for things that genuinely puzzled him. Not devil arm damage, he said quietly. Not divine, not... He trailed off, turning a piece of dissolving chitin over with one finger. Not anything I've got a word for. He stood, looked up the street in the direction the residual disturbance seemed to trail, the way a scent trails, fading with distance, but unmistakably directional. Something had walked north on Crone Avenue. Something that had killed 3 demons without apparent effort and then simply continued, which suggested either profound confidence or profound indifference. And Dante's gut was telling him it was both. His phone buzzed. He glanced at it. Weird readings from Sector 7, too. And Sector 4. And also Sector 9 is asking questions that I don't have answers for, and I don't like not having answers. Nico followed immediately by. Dante, what did you let into the city? He typed back one-handed while he walked, working on it. Her response was instantaneous and consisted entirely of punctuation that expressed profound skepticism. The trail led him 6 blocks north before it went somewhere unexpected, up. Not flight, exactly. And the disturbance climbed the side of a building, with the casual indifference of gravity being a suggestion rather than a law. And Dante tracked it to the rooftop of what had been a mid-range hotel before the Qliphoth had taken a structural interest in its foundations. The roof was flat wide, offering a view of Red Grave's damaged skyline that was almost beautiful in the way that ruins sometimes were. Honest about what they'd survived. Alucard was standing at the far edge, looking out over the city, his coat moving in a wind that wasn't blowing anywhere else on the roof. He didn't turn around when Dante stepped onto the rooftop. He did, however, speak. I was wondering, Alucard said, his voice carrying the particular quality of someone who had spent centuries making sure his voice carried regardless of conditions, how long it would take for something interesting to come find me. Dante stopped, looked at the figure silhouetted against the red grave skyline, took a slow breath through his nose, and processed what his senses were giving him. The negative space quality, the age, the absolute absence of anything his power-reading instincts could categorize. He put rebellion over his shoulder. "You're buying the cleanup bill for those 3 demons," Dante said. "City's got a contractor now. She charges by the dissolve." Alucard turned around. The smile that Dante saw was not a human smile. It wasn't a demonic smile either. He'd seen plenty of those, knew their architecture, understood their threat calculus. This was something that wore the shape of a smile the way a coat rack wore a coat. "Oh," Alucard said, and then his red eyes moved over Dante with the focused attention of something that had lived long enough to find almost nothing genuinely surprising, and had just found an exception. "You're him, the son." "The one and only," Dante said. "And you are?" The smile widened by a degree that should not have been structurally possible. "Alucard," he said. "And I have to say..." His gaze moved over Dante's coat, his weapons, the easy, dangerous confidence in his stance. "You are the first thing I've seen in this universe that I'm not entirely certain I could kill without effort." Dante's expression didn't change. "Flattery," he said, "gets you nowhere." "Good," Alucard said. "I find flattery boring." The rooftop held its breath. This was not metaphor. The air on that roof, the wind that had been moving through Alucard's coat with its sourceless persistence, the ambient city noise drifting up from 6 floors below, the distant sound of Red Grave doing its best impression of a city that had its situation under control. All of it went quiet in the specific way that things go quiet when 2 apex predators are in the same space, and both of them are taking the other's measure with the kind of focused attention that precedes either conversation or catastrophe. Dante had faced demons that could level mountains. He had killed a god. He had stood in the presence of his father's legacy and found it wanting and built something better from the wreckage. His threat sense was not a nervous system response at this point. It was a philosophical instrument, refined by decades of survival. And what it was telling him right now was not danger in any conventional sense. It was telling him, unknown variable, proceed with interest. "So," Dante said, because silence was a tool, and he'd never been particularly attached to tools, "you fell through a rift, killed 3 demons on the way to a rooftop view. Now you're standing there looking at me like I'm the first interesting thing you've seen in a while." He tilted his head. "What's the pitch?" "No pitch," Alucard said. "I'm retired from pitches. They require caring about outcomes." He turned back to the skyline briefly, and something in his posture shifted. Not relaxing exactly, but settling. You know, the way a very old predator settles when it decides the thing in front of it isn't prey. "I'm here because a hole opened and I stepped through it. Simple as that." "Holes don't just open." "No," Alucard agreed pleasantly. "They don't." He looked at Dante over his shoulder. "Your city had some recent structural trauma, dimensionally speaking. The Qliphoth left residue, resonance. My world has its own resonances. Occasionally they rhyme." He turned fully back around. "Think of it as an accidental introduction. The universe decided we should meet. The universe has bad timing. The universe has perfect timing," Alucard said. And there was something underneath the theatrical delivery, something genuine, the way a very deep lake is genuine about its depth, even when the surface looks still. It always introduces the right variables at the right moment. The question is what you do with the introduction. Dante studied him. The coat, the glasses, the arsenal visible and implied, the quality of wrongness that his senses kept trying to categorize and kept failing at. Not demonic wrongness, not the wrongness of divine power misapplied, something older and more patient than either. Something that had been wrong for so long, it had become its own kind of right. "You're not a demon," Dante said. "No. Not human. Debatable, technically, in the loosest possible sense of the word." Alucard's smile shifted into something more specific. "I am what a human becomes when you take everything human about them. The fear, the mortality, the desperate need for meaning, and replace it with something that has had centuries to decide what it wants to be instead." "Vampire." "The vampire?" Alucard said, with the particular emphasis of someone correcting a category error. "There is a distinction." Dante nodded slowly. Then he said, "Okay, here's my problem with this conversation. Only one. I've got 3 demons dissolved on an intersection 6 blocks south. I've got sensor readings that are making my tech specialist send me punctuation instead of words, which means she's past language. I've got a city that just finished rebuilding from an apocalypse and does not need another one." He brought rebellion down from his shoulder, not raising it, just holding it, the way a carpenter holds a hammer when he's thinking about a nail. "And I've got you, who I can't read, who I can't categorize, standing on a rooftop in the middle of my city looking like you're deciding whether to be entertained or destructive." "Why not both?" Alucard said. "That's the problem," Dante said. "What happened next happened the way these things always happen between beings of sufficient power and insufficient patience. Not with a declaration or a countdown, but with a movement." Dante was fast. Genuinely, absurdly fast. Sparda blood fast, the kind of speed that had ended conversations with demon lords before they'd fully processed that the conversation was ending. Rebellion came up and across in an arc that would have bisected something considerably more solid than air. Alucard wasn't there. He was 6 feet to the left, in the same standing posture. Coat still moving in its sourceless wind, e-glasses still catching the ambient light. He looked mildly interested in the way a chess player looks mildly interested when an opponent makes an unexpected opening move. "Better than I expected," he said. "Go on." Ebony and ivory were in Dante's hands before the sentence finished. Twin reports cracking across the rooftop. Muzzle flash painting the scene in brief white light. The shots were precise, placed with the intuitive ballistic intelligence of someone who had been doing this for decades, aimed not where Alucard was, but where the geometry of his movement suggested he'd be. Alucard let them hit him. This was a choice, clearly. He stood and received 3 rounds from Ebony and 3 from Ivory with the expression of a man conducting a scientific experiment. Attentive, note-taking, mildly appreciative of the data. The rounds punched through his coat, through his chest, through the space where vital organs lived in beings that relied on vital organs. He looked down at the holes. He looked back up at Dante. "Interesting ammunition," he said. "There's something in these rounds. Divine adjacent, Sparda lineage, I'd imagine. The energy has a particular flavor." He paused. "It tingles." The holes closed, not slowly, not dramatically. They simply stopped being holes. Dante watched this with the focused attention of a professional taking notes. "Okay," he said. "So that's how it is." "That," Alucard said, "is how it begins." The shadow came from everywhere at once. It didn't pour or creep or surge. It arrived, the way Alucard himself had arrived, with the confidence of something that understood geometry differently than the people it was surprising. Dante was moving before it fully manifested. Devil trigger igniting in a corona of golden white power that hit the rooftop like a second sunrise. And in that light, the shadows burned back. And for one suspended moment, the two of them stood in the center of a circle of scorched rooftop, power against power. And the air between them cracked with the effort of the universe trying to find a vocabulary for what was happening. The impact when it came was not clean. It was not surgical. It was two irresistible forces discovering that the word irresistible needed a footnote. And the footnote was the 6-block radius of red grave that felt the shock wave and collectively decided that tonight was a good night to be somewhere with a reinforced basement. 2 city blocks was, in retrospect, a conservative estimate. The dust settled over 4 city blocks of newly redecorated red grave architecture with the particular patience of debris that had given up trying to understand how it got there. A building that had been a parking structure was now significantly more abstract in its design philosophy. The rooftop where the conversation had started no longer existed as a coherent horizontal surface. 2 streets had acquired new geometry that the city planning department was going to have strong opinions about. And in the center of the crater that used to be the intersection of Crone and Aldrich, 2 figures stood in the settling silence. One in a red coat that moved against physics. One in a red coat that was on fire in 3 places and deeply unbothered by this fact. Dante rolled his neck, devil trigger still burning around him, Minx casting everything in that gold-white light that made the shadows recede and the ambient demonic residue in Redgrave's air hiss and thin. He looked at Alucard across 12 feet of shattered asphalt with the expression of someone who had just recalibrated their baseline assumptions and found the process genuinely invigorating. Alucard looked back. His glasses were cracked on one side. This appeared to be the full extent of the damage. He reached up, removed the glasses, considered the crack with mild scholarly interest, and put them back on. "Devil trigger," he said. "That's what that's called. Among other things. It burns," Alucard said, with the tone of someone filing away information rather than complaining. Not unpleasantly, like standing very close to something genuinely holy. He tilted his head. "I haven't felt that in." He paused, doing the arithmetic. "A very long time." "I can do it again," Dante offered. "I was hoping you'd say that." What followed over the next 4 minutes was not a continuation of the fight, so much as a mutual education conducted at extreme violence. Dante was operating at full capacity, devil trigger sustained, rebellion, and the twin pistols working in the seamless combination that had taken years to perfect. Style switching with the fluid, unconscious grace of someone for whom combat was a first language. He was hitting Alucard, repeatedly, with things that would have ended most conversations permanently. Alucard was regenerating from all of it, learning from all of it, and periodically retaliating with something new each time. Shadow constructs that moved with genuine tactical intelligence. A darkness that pushed back against Devil Trigger's light, not by overpowering it, but by absorbing it, drinking it in the way dry earth drinks rain. And when he hit Dante, when the impacts landed, which was less often than Alucard seemed to find acceptable, they landed with the weight of something that had decided gravity was a setting rather than a constant. Dante had been hit by demon lords, by his brother at full Vergil capacity, by things that could crack the earth. He had a deeply personal relationship with the sensation of catastrophic impact, and an equally personal relationship with the healing factor that made it temporarily irrelevant. He was healing slower than usual, not dramatically slower, not worryingly slower, not yet. The Sparda blood was doing its work, the divine pull keeping him functional. But there was something in the force of Alucard's strikes that lingered at the cellular level, like the hits were leaving impressions rather than just damage. As if whatever Alucard was, he was sufficiently ancient and sufficiently other that even Dante's half-demonic physiology needed an extra moment to figure out how to file the damage under the correct category. He stored this information, filed it, kept moving. "You're slowing down," Alucard observed, during a half-second pause that both of them used to reassess. "I'm pacing myself," Dante said. "You're adapting," Alucard said, and the distinction in his voice was unmistakable. Approval, genuine and unperformed. The kind that only came from someone with standards high enough that approval was rare. "You felt something change, and you adjusted without breaking stride. He paused. "That's actually impressive." "You're regenerating from Devil Trigger enhanced hits," Dante said, "and you're doing it faster each time, like you're learning the frequency." "I'm always learning," Alucard said. "It's the one habit I never managed to quit." They looked at each other across the smoking crater. "We could keep going," Dante said. "We could," Alucard agreed. "I'd enjoy it, but..." And here something shifted in his expression. Something that pulled back from the theatrical and touched something more genuine. "I'm not actually here to destroy your city. That would be..." He searched for the word, "pedestrian." "High bar you've set for yourself." "I've earned the right to set high bars." Alucard straightened. The shadows that had been moving around him like a weather system settled, not disappearing but becoming still, restrained with the deliberate quality of a decision rather than a defeat. "I'm in a universe I don't know, with rules I don't fully understand yet. And I've just spent 4 minutes fighting the closest thing to a genuine challenge this world has apparently produced in some time." He looked at Dante with those red eyes that had stopped pretending to be anything other than what they were. "That makes you useful, which makes destroying you wasteful," Dante suggested. "I was going to say premature," Alucard said. "But yes, functionally equivalent." Dante let Devil Trigger drop. Not all the way. A residual burn stayed in his eyes, ready, because he hadn't survived this long by fully standing down in front of unknowns. But the full corona pulled back, and in the relative dimness that followed, a red grave reasserted itself around them. Distant sirens, the structural groan of the parking structure reconsidering its remaining geometry. The sound of Nico's van somewhere in the middle distance, approaching at a speed that suggested she'd watched the explosion on sensor and had opinions about it. "So, what do you want?" Dante asked. It was the question everything came down to, eventually. What does the new variable want? What does it need? What will it cost? Alucard was quiet for a moment. Genuinely quiet, not the theatrical pause of someone constructing a response, but the actual silence of something very old, consulting something very deep. "I want to understand this world," he said finally. "Its rules, its powers, its..." He glanced toward the skyline, toward the faint residual signatures that red grave bled like a wound that hadn't fully closed. "Its nature. I have stepped into a universe that runs on different fuel than mine. I find that I want to know what that fuel is. And while you're figuring that out..." Alucard smiled again, less wide this time, more honest. "Anything interesting enough to notice me is welcome to try." The van screeched to a stop at the crater's edge. Nico leaned out the window, took in the 4-block radius of structural damage, looked at Dante, looked at Alucard, looked back at Dante. "I have so many questions," she said. "Get in line," Dante told her. From somewhere across the city, from a rooftop considerably more intact than the one that no longer existed, or from a silhouette that had been present for the last 90 seconds of this exchange, without either participant below detecting its arrival. A pair of eyes the color of winter moonlight watched the crater and its occupants with an expression that contained, in precise equal measure, analytical interest and profound contempt. Vergil had been listening. Vergil had questions of his own. Vergil did not ask questions the way other people ask questions. Other people ask questions with words, with voices, with the social infrastructure of inquiry. The raised tone, the collaborative implication, the implicit suggestion that the person being asked had some agency in whether they answered. Vergil asked questions the way a scalpel asked questions of an anatomy, with precision, with complete indifference to the comfort of the subject, and with the absolute certainty that he would find what he was looking for regardless of cooperation. He had been on that rooftop for 6 minutes before Nico's van arrived. He had watched the last 90 seconds of the exchange in the crater below with the focused, analytical attention he applied to everything that represented either a threat or an opportunity. And he had already reached several conclusions that Dante, characteristically, had not. The first conclusion: whatever had come through the rift was not demonic, not divine, not Sparda adjacent, not Qliphoth residue, not any category in Vergil's considerable internal taxonomy of powers and their sources. This was not a gap in his knowledge. Vergil did not maintain gaps in his knowledge. He filled them with the same relentless discipline he applied to everything else. This was a genuine unknown, a data point that existed outside the existing framework. The second conclusion: it was old. Older than the demon lords he had killed. Older than the Qliphoth. Possibly. And this was the conclusion that Vergil turned over in his mind with the careful attention of someone handling something fragile. Older than the Sparda bloodline's records, which went back further than most beings in this universe could conceptually navigate. The third conclusion: Dante had done what Dante always did. Engaged with the unknown directly, physically, immediately, and had survived it through the combination of raw power and improvisational genius that Vergil had spent his entire life simultaneously respecting and finding philosophically insufficient. The fourth conclusion: the thing in the crater had chosen not to finish it, had pulled back, not from inability, that much was clear from what Vergil had observed, but from preference, from a cost-benefit calculation that had arrived at not yet and been comfortable with that answer. Things that were comfortable with not yet were things that had long games. Vergil did not like long games that he wasn't playing himself. He came down from the rooftop the way he did everything. Without announcement, without theater, arriving at the crater's edge with the quality of something that had always been there and had simply chosen this moment to be visible. Dante saw him first, because Dante always saw him now. The twin awareness of shared blood, the particular frequency of Vergil's presence that registered in the Sparda lineage like a tuning fork finding its note. Nico saw him second and had the good sense to become very interested in her steering wheel. Alucard saw him third, and something happened that had not happened yet in this encounter. Something that was subtle enough that only someone watching very carefully would catch it. Alucard went still. Not the stillness of threat response, not the stillness of someone preparing to act. The stillness of something very old, recognizing, for the first time since it arrived in this universe, something that registered on an instinctive level as significant. His red eyes moved over Vergil with the same cataloging attention they'd moved over Dante, and then, fractionally, barely perceptibly, they moved differently. Less like taking inventory, more like reading. Two of them, Alucard said, to no one in particular. My brother, Dante said. Vergil? The one who tried to end the world, Alucard said. It wasn't a question. He'd been in Red Grave long enough, moving through its demonic residue and its architectural scars, to have assembled a rough picture of what had happened here. Twice, if the energy signatures are accurate. 3 times if you count the first attempt generously, Dante said. I count everything generously, Vergil said, arriving at the crater floor without looking at either of them. studying instead the pattern of shadow damage that Alucard's power had left on the asphalt. The way the darkness had moved, the geometry of it, the logic underneath the chaos. He crouched beside one particularly deep shadow impression and examined it with the expression of a man reading a language he hadn't encountered before, but was confident he could master. "You absorb light," he said, to the impression in the asphalt. "Not destroy it, contain it, redirect the energy inward." He stood, turned to Alucard directly for the first time. "What's the upper limit?" "I'm sorry," Alucard said. "Your absorption capacity," Vergil said, with the patience of someone who found patience unnecessary, but occasionally useful. "It has a ceiling. Everything has a ceiling. What's yours?" The silence that followed this question was a specific kind of silence. The kind that happens when something is asked a question it hasn't been asked before. Not because the question was clever, because most things, encountering Alucard, were too busy reacting to think analytically. Vergil had skipped the reacting entirely and gone straight to the analysis. And Alucard was processing this the way you process something unexpected, with the particular quality of attention reserved for genuine novelty. "You're not afraid," Alucard said. "Fear is inefficient," Vergil said. "Your brother was afraid," Alucard said. "Briefly. He managed it well, but it was there. The physiological markers are very difficult to hide from something that spent centuries learning to read prey." He paused. "You have none of them." "I'm aware of what you are," Vergil said. "A vampire, ancient, clearly. Regenerative to a degree that makes conventional damage irrelevant, operating on a power source that doesn't exist in this universe's standard taxonomy." He picked up a piece of shadow-scorched asphalt and turned it over in his hand. "The Yamato cuts the boundary between the human world and the demon world. It operates on dimensional logic, the separation of things that should be separate. I've been considering whether that principle extends to separating a being from its power source." Another silence. "That," Alucard said slowly, "is a genuinely interesting thought." "I have them occasionally," Vergil said. "He does," Dante confirmed, from where he was leaning against the van. "Annoying habit." The demonic energy in the air around them shifted. Subtly, the way air shifts before weather changes. Not Vergil's power, not Dante's. Something external. Something moving through Redgrave's demon-saturated atmosphere like a current moving through water, directional and purposeful. All three of them felt it simultaneously, Dante's hand moving to ebony, Vergil's fingers finding the Yamato's handle with the unconscious precision of long practice. Alucard simply turning, his coat flaring, his red eyes tracking something invisible to conventional senses. "That's new," Dante said. "It's not new," Alucard said. "It's been building for approximately 40 minutes, since I arrived." His voice had shifted, the theatrical quality pulling back to reveal something underneath it, something older and more serious. "Something in this city has been broadcasting, on a frequency I recognize." "Recognize from where?" Vergil asked. "From every universe I've ever encountered where the power structure is about to rearrange itself," Alucard said. "Something high in your demonic hierarchy has received the news of my arrival. It's been having a meeting." He looked at both brothers. The meeting appears to have just concluded. As if in answer, the darkness at the far end of Aldrich Street, the deep urban darkness beyond the reach of Redgrave's battered streetlights, moved. Not wind moved, not shadow moved in the way Alucard's shadows moved. Moved with intention, with the specific directional quality of something very large, trying very hard to look like nothing. The interesting thing about this universe, Alucard said conversationally, as the darkness at the end of the street continued its deliberate non-movement, is that your demons are so committed. In my world, the monsters know what they are. Here, he smiled, and it was the full smile again, the one with no business on a human face. Here they still think hiding is an option. The darkness at the end of Aldrich Street gave up pretending. What came out of the darkness at the end of Aldrich Street was not one demon. It was a delegation. This was, in Dante's considerable experience, significantly worse than one demon. One demon was a conversation, violent, occasionally property damaging, but fundamentally bilateral. A delegation implied organization, implied that something with enough authority to organize had done so, implied that whatever had spent the last 40 minutes having a meeting had reached a consensus, assigned representatives, and dispatched them with a specific agenda. Dante counted 7 as they emerged from the shadow, a mix of high-tier Empusa queens moving with the fluid, predatory grace of creatures who knew their own lethality. 2 fault variants that existed in the uncomfortable category of demons that were more concept than creature. And at the front, moving with the deliberate, unhurried confidence of a being that had survived the Qliphoth incursion, not by hiding, but by being too politically useful to kill, a demon that Dante recognized. Baal? Not the full Baal, not the massive amphibian horror that had given him trouble in the Fortuna era. A fragment, a projection, a piece of Baal's consciousness wearing a body assembled from red graves, ambient demonic energy, with the precision of something that wanted to be taken seriously without committing its full self to the encounter. Smart. Diplomatically smart. The kind of move that said, "We are here to talk, but we have brought the capacity for the opposite." "Son of Sparda," the Baal fragment said, its voice carrying the particular resonance of something speaking through assembled matter rather than a natural throat. Its compound eyes, amber, multifaceted, deeply unpleasant, moved past Dante to Alucard with the specific quality of attention you gave something that had been the subject of a 40-minute emergency meeting. "We have no quarrel with you tonight." "That's new," Dante said. "The situation is new," Baal fragment said. Its eyes didn't move from Alucard. "What you have brought into this city didn't bring," Dante said. "It arrived on its own." "What has arrived?" Baal fragment corrected, with the diplomatic precision of something that had prepared its language carefully. "Constitutes an anomaly that affects the balance of this territory. We are here to address that anomaly directly." "You're here to talk to me," Alucard said. His voice had the quality it had taken on since the darkness at the end of the street had started moving. That older register, the theatrical layers set aside. Something underneath it that was genuinely, attentively present in the way that very dangerous things were present when they were deciding whether the situation merited their full engagement. He had moved, without appearing to move, so that he was slightly forward of Dante and Vergil, not blocking them, not claiming protection of them, but positioned in the spatial grammar of something that was establishing itself as the primary point of contact. Dante noted this, filed it. "The demonic hierarchy of Red Grave," Baal fragment said carefully, "has been aware of the dimensional instability left by the Qliphoth's removal for some time. We have been monitoring. The rift that opened tonight was not unexpected. What came through it was." "I have that effect," Alucard said pleasantly. "You are not demonic," Baal fragment said. "You are not divine. You operate on a power source we cannot classify. You have already destroyed 3 members of our lower hierarchy without apparent effort, and your presence is..." It paused, the amber eyes doing something complicated, disruptive, to the energy balance of this territory. Your existence here creates a frequency that our kind finds. Frightening? Alucard suggested. The Bael fragment was quiet for a moment. Destabilizing, it said, which was a more honest answer than Dante had expected from it. He said frightening, Vergil said from behind Dante, with the flat observational quality of someone annotating a text. So what do you want? Alucard asked the fragment, direct. Genuine question, no performance, the same quality Dante had heard when Alucard had said, I want to understand this world. Whatever game-playing he engaged in, the man, the thing, the being apparently had a genuine allergy to wasted time when he wanted real information. We want to understand what you are, Bael Fragment said, and what your intentions are in this territory. And if my intentions are destructive, then we would rather know that now, Bael Fragment said, with the pragmatic honesty of a creature that had survived long enough to value accurate information over comfortable information, then discover it after the fact. Alucard looked at the delegation for a long moment. The Empusa queens had positioned themselves in a loose semicircle, not aggressive, but present, a visual reminder of the capacity for the opposite that the delegation had brought with it. The fault variance pulsed with that particular wrongness that made the air around them taste like ozone and old copper. And behind all of them, in the deep darkness at the end of Aldrich Street, Dante could feel the weight of whatever had decided not to come forward yet. Something considerably larger than a fragment, something that was listening to this conversation from a safe remove and would act on what it heard. My intentions, Alucard said, are to exist in this universe for as long as the universe manages to be interesting. He tilted his head. What I am is a vampire. The vampire. I have consumed the souls of nearly 4 million individuals. I exist everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. And I cannot be killed by anything that operates on the principle of killing, because I have already thoroughly explored what it means to be dead and found it wanting. He paused. Does that answer your question? The Bael fragment processed this. It raises additional questions, it said. Good questions are worth more than easy answers, Alucard said. I find civilizations that understand this tend to last longer. He looked at the fragment with those red eyes and said, with complete and genuine sincerity, I am not here to destroy your hierarchy. Your demons are. He glanced at the Empusa queens with the expression of a food critic visiting a mid-range establishment. Beneath my interest individually. Your structure, however, the way power moves through this world, the nature of demonic energy, is the relationship between your kind and the Sparda bloodline. That interests me considerably. Another silence. The delegation exchanged looks that communicated complex information in the wordless shorthand of creatures who had been working together long enough to have developed a shared language of glances. You want to learn, Bael Fragment said. I want to understand, Alucard corrected. There's a distinction. Learning implies a curriculum. Understanding implies... He smiled. A more personal relationship with the material. Nero arrived at this exact moment, which was either perfect or catastrophic timing, depending on how you felt about the introduction of additional variables into an already complicated negotiation. The motorcycle came around the corner of Aldrich at a speed that suggested he'd gotten Nico's panicked text and had ridden accordingly, and he took in the scene. The crater, the delegation, Dante and Vergil, and Alucard. With a rapid threat assessment of someone who had graduated from the School of Hard Knocks with honors and a collection of scars. He stopped the bike, looked at Alucard specifically, with the particular focus of someone whose Devilbringer arm was reacting to a nearby presence in a way it had never reacted before. not the pull of demonic energy, not the recognition of divine power, something else entirely, something the arm was reaching toward with confused fascination. And the way a compass reaches toward a magnetic source it doesn't have a direction for. "Dante," Nero said, without looking away from Alucard. Who is this?" "That," Dante said, "is the question of the evening." "He is," Alucard said, looking at Nero with the focused attention he'd given Vergil, that reading quality, that assessment of something recognized as significant. Considerably more than he appears to be. His red eyes moved to the Devil-Bringer arm with scholarly interest. "And that arm is very confused right now. It's reaching for me like it recognizes something." Nero looked at his arm. The arm continued its confused fascination. "What does it recognize?" Nero asked. "The same thing all power recognizes when it encounters something genuinely ancient," Alucard said. "It recognizes that the thing it's reaching toward has been here longer than the rules it was built to operate by." He looked at Nero with something that might, on a different face, you have been called warmth. "Don't worry, I find it charming." The bile fragment cleared its throat, a sound it shouldn't have been capable of producing, but managed anyway through the sheer diplomatic necessity of reclaiming the conversation. "The hierarchy requires an answer," it said. "Will you respect the territorial boundaries of Redgrave's demonic structure, or must we—" "No," Alucard said. The fragment stopped. "No? Which part?" "No, I won't respect your territorial boundaries," Alucard said pleasantly. "I go where I find interesting things. Your boundaries are lines on a map I wasn't given when I arrived." He looked at the fragment with those red eyes and said, with absolute clarity and zero malice, "But I will tell you this. The things in this city worth destroying, I won't destroy. The things worth studying, I'll study. On the things that try to stop me, the smile, the full one, will have a very educational experience." The bile fragment looked at him for a long moment. Then it looked at Dante. "Is he always like this?" it asked. "I've known him for about 2 hours," Dante said. "Yes," said Vergil. The delegation left the way it had arrived, with the dignity of something that had come for answers and received instead a new category of problem. The bale fragment dissolved back into the ambient darkness of Aldrich Street with the air of a diplomat filing a report that its superiors were going to find deeply unsatisfying. The Empusa Queens retreated in formation. The fault variants simply ceased their local presence, folding back into whatever conceptual space they occupied when they weren't being visible. The weight behind them, the large thing that had been listening from the deep dark at the end of the street, lingered for a moment longer than everything else. Long enough for Alucard to turn and look directly at it across 200 meters of empty street with the specific quality of attention that said, "I know you're there. I've known since before you arrived. The choice to leave is yours, and I recommend you make it." The weight withdrew. Silence returned to the crater at Crone and Aldrich with the tentative quality of something that wasn't sure it was welcome, but had nowhere else to be. Nero had gotten off the motorcycle. He was standing at the crater's edge looking at the 4-block radius of structural consequences, with the expression of someone doing insurance math in their head and finding the results spiritually distressing. His Devil-Bringer arm had stopped its confused reaching and settled into something more like watchful attention, oriented toward Alucard the way a compass needle oriented toward north, not with urgency, but with the persistent low-level awareness of a thing that had found its reference point. "Okay," Nero said, to the group in general and no one specifically. "Somebody explained this to me like I didn't just ride across the city at 2 in the morning to find a crater where a parking structure used to be. Dimensional rift, Dante said. Qliphoth residue. Ancient vampire from a different universe. Minor property damage. Minor, Nico said from the van, in the tone of someone for whom the word had just lost all meaning. He's not a demon, Nero said, still looking at Alucard. A statement, not a question. The Devil-Bringer's assessment was apparently unambiguous on this point. Not remotely, Alucard confirmed. But you're not human either. I was, Alucard said. Briefly. It didn't take. Nero absorbed this with a particular resilience of someone who had grown up in a world where his own arm was a demonic inheritance, and his grandfather had tried to sacrifice a city to a demon god, and had developed accordingly robust standards for what qualified as surprising. And you're staying, he said. For now, Alucard said. The universe hasn't bored me yet. Great, Nero said flatly, with the tone of someone for whom this was not great. Vergil had moved away from the group during the delegation's retreat and was standing at the far edge of the crater, the Yamato drawn not in threat, but in examination, holding it at angle to the residual shadow damage in the asphalt, watching how the blade's dimensional cutting energy interacted with what Alucard's power had left behind. The interaction was subtle, visible only to someone specifically looking for it. A faint resonance, the Yamato's edge finding something in the shadow impressions to respond to, like a key discovering an unfamiliar lock that it might, with effort, fit. Alucard watched this from across the crater, said nothing. His expression was the focused one, the reading one. You're thinking about the Yamato, Alucard said to Vergil's back. I'm always thinking about the Yamato, Vergil said, which was true in a way that went beyond the current context. You think it could cut me? Alucard said, not alarmed, interested. I think it cuts the boundary between states of existence, Vergil said. Human world and demon world, life and death, power and its source. He sheathed the Yamato with the clean, precise motion of long practice. You exist in a state that defies conventional boundary. You are simultaneously alive and dead, present and absent, singular and containing multitudes. He turned. The Yamato doesn't cut things. It cuts distinctions. The question is whether your existence is maintained by a distinction that can be severed. And if it can, Alucard said, then we'd find out what you are without it, Vergil said, which would answer several questions. And if I'd rather not participate in that particular experiment, then we'd find out if you can prevent it, Vergil said, with the flat simplicity of someone for whom this was not a threat, but a logical progression, which would answer different questions, equally useful. Dante looked between them. You two are going to be a problem, he said. We're going to be an education, Alucard said, and in the way he said it made it sound like the more dangerous option. The night had moved past 3 a.m. Red Grave was as quiet as it ever got, which was not very quiet. The city having developed a certain ambient restlessness from years of demonic incursion that no amount of civic rebuilding had fully exorcised. In the middle distance, a siren moved through the outer districts. Closer, something shifted in the structural wreckage of the former parking structure with the sound of settling concrete finding its new equilibrium. It was Nico who broke the operational silence, because Nico's relationship with silence was the same as her relationship with speed limits. She was aware of its existence and had chosen a different path. She climbed out of the van with her tablet, pulled up the sensor readings, looked at them, unlooked at Alucard, looked back at the readings. Okay, so, she said, in the tone of someone who had decided that the gap between what she understood in what was happening was best approached as a professional challenge rather than an existential crisis. Your energy signature is breaking my equipment, not overloading it. Breaking it, like it's reading something that the software doesn't have a category for, and it's just... She showed the tablet to Dante. It's inventing categories. Look at this. It made up a unit of measurement. Dante looked at the screen. The unit was labeled, in Nico's own previous notation, as... and the current reading was several. Several, Dante said. Several, Nico confirmed grimly. I've had that effect on instrumentation before, Alucard said, with the tone of someone acknowledging a recurring personal characteristic. In my universe, we eventually gave up on measurement and moved to qualitative assessment. Which was? Nico asked. Extremely and don't, Alucard said. Nico stared at him. Then she wrote both of these down on her tablet with the professional seriousness of someone adding legitimate data to a legitimate scientific record. It was during this exchange, during this specific window of relative normality, of crater-side conversation and instrumentation complaints, and the particular exhausted black humor that the DMC crew had developed as a survival mechanism for exactly these situations, that Dante's phone buzzed with a message from a number he didn't recognize. He looked at it. The message was short, professionally formatted, the kind of language that came from something that had learned to communicate with humans by studying human communication very carefully, and had mastered the technical form while missing several of the social textures that made it feel natural. We are aware of the anomaly that entered Redgrave tonight. We have been aware since the rift opened. We did not intervene with the demonic delegation because we wished to observe how the anomaly handled independent contact. It handled it in ways that are relevant to our interests. We would like to meet. VR, Dante read it twice, showed it to Vergil, who read it once, which was sufficient. VR, Dante said. Initials, Vergil said, or a designation, or an abbreviation for something we don't have a reference for yet, Dante said. In my experience, Alucard said, from over Dante's shoulder, having moved, without sound, to a position where he could read the screen, which Dante noted with the specific feeling of someone who had just discovered their personal space had different dimensions than previously understood. Messages that begin with, "We are aware," and end with, "We would like to meet," come from one of two kinds of senders. Which kinds? Nero asked. The kind that wants to use you, Alucard said, and the kind that wants to study you. He straightened. In my experience, the distinction matters less than most people think. Both kinds are ultimately interested in the same thing, understanding what you are well enough to predict what you'll do. His red eyes moved to Dante. The interesting question is whether you respond. And what would you do? Dante asked. Alucard smiled the smaller smile, the honest one. I'd respond immediately, he said. Nothing tells you more about what something wants than watching how it reacts when it gets what it asked for. Dante looked at the message again. Then he typed back, when and where. The response came in 4 seconds. It contained coordinates and a time, 6 hours from now, which suggested either confidence or impatience, and a single additional line that rewrote the context of everything that had come before it. Come alone, and please do not bring the vampire. We need to speak about him first. The crater was very quiet. They know about me, Alucard said, reading over Dante's shoulder again with an expression of pure, undisguised delight. How wonderful. I haven't been known about in a new universe before. He straightened, adjusted his glasses. Don't go alone, he said to Dante. With the decisive clarity of someone who had made a strategic assessment and was presenting the conclusion without the working. Whatever sent that message has been watching since the rift opened. It has had 6 hours of observational data, and it has chosen to open contact now, after the delegation, after our exchange, after the instrumentation failure. He looked at the phone. It's not afraid of you. It's not afraid of your brother. It specifically does not want me present. The smile again. Which means I'm the variable it hasn't solved yet. So you want to come? Dante said. I want to be there before you arrive, Alucard said. There's a difference. Vergil, who had been listening to all of this with the expression of someone watching 2 different methodologies arrive at the same destination, said, he's right. Dante looked at his brother. You're agreeing with the ancient vampire we met 2 hours ago. I'm agreeing with the correct tactical assessment, Vergil said. The source is irrelevant. I like him, Alucard said of Vergil, with the genuine warmth of someone who had identified a kindred spirit in the wild and was appropriately pleased about it. Don't, Dante said to both of them, without real conviction. Somewhere across Red Grave, in a location that the coordinates on Dante's phone were currently pointing toward, something that had been watching since 2:17 in the morning received Dante's response and began, with careful, methodical precision, to prepare for a meeting that had been inevitable since the moment the rift opened. It had not anticipated what it was about to discover. The coordinates led to the Fortuna district. This was, on reflection, either deeply appropriate or deeply ominous. And Dante had spent enough time in this business to know that the distinction between those 2 things was usually a matter of timing. The Fortuna district was Red Grave's northeastern edge, one of the areas that the Qliphoth had touched last and hardest. A dense tangle of pre-war architecture and post-apocalypse scaffolding where the rebuilding effort had stalled somewhere between structural assessment and municipal budget argument. Buildings stood half-restored, their facades a patchwork of original stonework and modern repair material, their interiors dark and largely uninhabited. It looked, Dante thought, like a place that something had chosen specifically because it was the kind of place where meetings happened that weren't supposed to leave records. He arrived at 5:45, which was 15 minutes early, which was 30 minutes after Alucard had left the crater on foot and simply walked in the direction of the coordinates without asking for a ride, navigating Red Grave's demon-scarred streets with the unhurried confidence of something that either knew exactly where it was going or was sufficiently dangerous that the distinction didn't matter. Vergil arrived at 5:50, which was 10 minutes early, which was the same as on time for Vergil. Nero arrived at 5:58, which was 2 minutes early, which was close enough that Dante had stopped arguing about it approximately 3 years ago. Nico was in the van 3 blocks south with the sensor array running and a thermos of coffee and what she had described as a genuinely unhealthy level of personal investment in seeing how this turns out. She had also, with the professional thoroughness that Dante valued in direct proportion to how often it saved his life, run the coordinates against every database she had access to, public, private, and several that occupied an uncertain legal category, and had texted her findings at 5:49. Building is registered to a holding company that is registered to another holding company that is registered to a third holding company that appears to exist primarily to be registered to. The original ownership traces to something called the Redgrave Institute for Applied Dimensional Studies, which was apparently active briefly after the first Qliphoth incident, and then formally dissolved, except that it didn't actually dissolve, it just stopped being findable. Also, the power is on in the building, which it shouldn't be, because the grid in that district has been offline since the Qliphoth. So either someone has a generator or someone has something better than a generator. Probably don't touch anything. The building's front entrance was unlocked. The lobby inside was clean, not cleaned recently clean, but actively maintained clean, The kind of clean that required ongoing effort rather than a one-time intervention. Emergency lighting ran along the floor at ankle height, casting the space in cool blue that turned everything into a study in shadow and edge. Banks of equipment lined the walls, sensor arrays, dimensional measurement devices, things that Dante recognized as belonging to a category of technology he associated with people who took the multiverse seriously as an engineering problem rather than a philosophical one. In the center of the lobby, standing with the careful stillness of someone who had been waiting and had prepared for the wait, was a woman. Late 30s, or built like late 30s with the eyes of something considerably older. Dark coat, practical cut. The kind of posture that came from either military background or sufficiently demanding personal standard that it amounted to the same thing. She looked at Dante when he entered, then at Vergil, then at Nero, each with the sequential assessment of someone running a checklist. Then she looked at the corner of the room where the shadows were deepest, where there was no logical reason for anything to be, and said, "I did ask you not to bring him." "I didn't bring him," Dante said. "He brought himself." Alucard detached from the shadows of the far corner, with the pleasant ease of someone who had been there since before the building's current occupant had arrived, and had spent the intervening time in the productive quiet of a being who found patience genuinely effortless. He crossed the lobby until he was in the blue emergency light, and stopped, studying the woman with that reading quality, that assessment of significance. "You're not from this universe either," he said. The woman looked at him steadily. "No," she said. "I'm not." "How long?" 11 years, she said. "Give or take dimensional drift." Alucard was quiet for a moment. Then he said, with genuine respect, the rare kind, the kind that wasn't performance. 11 years alone in a foreign universe, managing, establishing infrastructure. He looked at the equipment banks, building something functional. He looked back at her. "That's not easy." "No," she said. "It isn't." "Who are you?" Dante asked, because this conversation had the quality of two people who had recognized each other across a room, and he was standing in the room without the recognition. "My name is Vera Roth," she said. "In my universe of origin, I was a dimensional theorist. Specifically, the theory and mechanics of cross-universal rift formation, stabilization, and traversal. I came through a rift 11 years ago during an experiment that went differently than planned. I have been here since." She looked at Dante with those old young eyes. "I've been monitoring dimensional activity in Red Grave since the first Qliphoth incident. The tree destabilized local space-time in ways that your..." She paused, selecting the word carefully. "Community has addressed militarily, but not dimensionally. The rift last night was the 14th I've recorded. It was the first to bring something through." "Something," Alucard said, with the tone of someone noting a word choice. "Someone," Vera corrected, without flinching. "I apologize. Force of habit. 11 years of treating dimensional anomalies as data points is a difficult habit to break in the moment." "What do you want?" Vergil asked. Because Vergil had the same allergy to preamble as Alucard, and the two of them were going to be genuinely exhausting in any extended operational context. Dante reflected. "I want to close the rifts," Vera said. "Permanently. The Qliphoth's removal left a dimensional wound in Red Grave that is getting worse, not better. The 14th rift last night was larger than the 13th. The 15th will be larger than the 14th. She paused. "Eventually something will come through that makes last night look like a..." "Careful," Alucard said pleasantly. "A minor incident," she finished. I need access to a power source capable of performing dimensional cauterization at a scale I haven't been able to achieve with anything available in this universe. Her eyes moved to the Yamato at Vergil's hip. I've been watching the Yamato's energy signature for 3 years. It cuts dimensional boundaries. In theory, it could also seal them. She looked at Vergil directly. I need 20 minutes with you and the blade and a dimensional focal point I've identified in the Fortuna District's lower levels. Vergil looked at her with the expression of someone evaluating a proposal on its merits, while simultaneously evaluating the person making it for hidden variables. In theory, he said. I'm a theorist, Vera said. I work in theory until I have the resources for practice. And where do I fit into this? Alucard asked. Vera looked at him. For the first time since Dante had entered the building, something in her carefully maintained composure shifted. Not breaking, not cracking, but acknowledging a weight it had been managing. You're the problem and the solution simultaneously, she said, with the honesty of someone who had decided that managing this particular being's reaction to information was not a project she had the resources for. The rift that brought you here opened because of Qliphoth residue resonating with dimensional frequencies from your universe of origin. Your presence here is now stabilizing that specific resonance, like a plug in a hole. If you leave, the hole reopens and potentially widens. She paused. If you stay, the resonance continues, but remains contained at its current scale. So, I'm infrastructure, Alucard said. Involuntarily, Vera said. The lobby held its breath. Dante watched Alucard process this. Watched the theatrical layer, the performative nihilism, the centuries of careful distance. All of it moving aside for a moment while something underneath engaged with a piece of information that was genuinely new. He had arrived in this universe by accident. His continued presence here was serving a function he hadn't chosen. He was, in a universe he'd entered out of existential curiosity, accidentally load-bearing. That, Alucard said slowly, is the funniest thing that has happened to me in approximately 200 years. Nero blinked. You're laughing about this? I'm delighted by it, Alucard said, with the precise specificity of someone making a distinction that mattered to them. I came through a hole in the universe looking for something interesting. I have discovered that the universe needs me here. He looked at Vera. The universe needs me, specifically, or functionally. The smile was the genuine one, not the threat, not the performance, something that sat deeper and older in his face. Do you understand how long it's been since anything needed me for something other than violence? Vera looked at him carefully. I'm not sure whether to find that reassuring or alarming, she said. Both, Vergil said, which was the most efficient answer and therefore the one Vergil provided. The Yamato, Dante said, pulling the operational thread back before it could unspool further, can seal the rifts. You need Vergil for that. He looked at his brother. Your call. Vergil was quiet for 3 seconds, which for Vergil was the equivalent of an extended deliberation. He was looking at Vera with the expression of someone reading past the surface of what was being presented, past the credentials and the equipment and the 11 years of careful infrastructure building, to the thing underneath, the actual motivating force. You want to go home? He said. Vera was very still. That's not relevant to the proposal, she said. It's relevant to whether I trust the proposal, Vergil said. Someone who wants to go home has a specific investment in making the dimensional work succeed. That's either a liability or an asset, depending on how good they are at separating personal interest from professional execution. He studied her. How good are you? I've been here 11 years, Vera said. I'm very good. Vergil nodded once. "Show me the focal point," he said. It was while Vera was leading Vergil toward the building's lower levels, with Nero following, because Nero had decided approximately 45 minutes ago that leaving Vergil unsupervised in a situation involving dimensional mechanics and a stranger was not a risk he was comfortable with. That Dante found himself standing in the blue-lit lobby with Alucard, and the quality of the silence between them had shifted into something that felt, improbably, like the beginning of an understanding. "She's right about you," Dante said. "You're holding the hole closed." "Apparently," Alucard said, "which means you're stuck here until we seal it. Or until I leave and something considerably worse comes through," Alucard said. "Yes, I've grasped the geometry. And you're okay with that?" Alucard turned to look at him. The red eyes in the blue light were something that Dante was going to need time to get used to. And he was a man who had gotten used to a great deal. "I told you," Alucard said. "The universe needs me here. Functionally. Specifically." He looked at the equipment banks, the sensor arrays, the 11 years of solitary work that Vera Roth had built in a universe that wasn't hers. "I have been in my universe of origin for over 500 years. I have been needed for violence, and occasionally for strategy, and once, memorably, for a very specific errand involving a Nazi Zeppelin." He paused. "Being needed to hold something together?" He paused again, and something moved through his expression that Dante had not seen there before, something that might have been, if you were being generous, the echo of something human, is new. Dante looked at him for a moment. "Don't get sentimental," he said. "We still don't know what that message sender actually wants, or whether the dimensional theory checks out, or whether Vergil's going to come back up from the lower levels, having agreed to something I'm going to regret." "No," Alucard agreed. "We don't." He looked toward the stairwell Vergil had descended. "But whatever is down there, and whatever is coming," the smile, the smaller, honest one, "it will at minimum be interesting. From below, in the building's lower levels, where the dimensional focal point pulsed with the particular resonance of a wound in space-time that had been slowly worsening for 2 years, something shifted. A sound moved up through the floors, not structural, not mechanical, not the Yamato's clean resonance or Vera's equipment or Nero's boots on concrete. Something else. Something that had been waiting in the focal point. Something that had been using the dimensional wound as a door that was almost open enough to step through. Something that had felt Alucard's presence arrive in this universe 6 hours ago and had recognized it. Not as a plug in a hole, but as a key in a lock. Something that knew his name. The sound came again, rising through the building's bones like a vibration looking for a frequency to settle into. Moving through concrete and steel and 11 years of carefully maintained instrumentation with the indifferent ease of something that didn't acknowledge the distinction between matter and space. Dante had his hand on ebony before the second repetition. Alucard had gone very still in the specific way he went still when something had his complete, undivided attention. Not the predatory stillness of something preparing to act, but the deeper stillness of something that had heard a sound from a direction it hadn't expected and was running very fast calculations about what that meant. "That's not the focal point," Alucard said. "No," Dante agreed. That's something using the focal point." "Yeah." They moved for the stairwell simultaneously, which would have been a coordination problem with most combinations of beings, but worked here because both of them had the spatial awareness of apex predators and the professional courtesy not to occupy the same geometry while moving fast. Dante hit the stairs first, by virtue of knowing the building's layout slightly better than someone who'd been in it for 4 hours. Alucard was beside him on the second landing through means that didn't involve the stairs at all. The lower levels of the Fortuna District building had been, in its previous institutional life, a basement research space, low ceilings, exposed infrastructure, the kind of utilitarian architecture that said the people who designed it cared exclusively about function. Vera had converted it into something considerably more purposeful. Equipment lined every wall, more dense than the lobby array, more specialized. Dimensional measurement instruments calibrated to the specific resonance frequencies of the red grave wound. Monitoring systems running continuous readings, and at the room's center, occupying a space that had been cleared of everything else with deliberate precision, the focal point itself. It was visible. That was the first thing. It was visible to the naked eye, which Dante hadn't expected and which told him something about how far the deterioration had progressed since Vera had first identified it. A vertical distortion in the air, approximately 2 meters tall. The geometry around it, subtly wrong in the way that dimensional wounds were wrong. Not dramatic, not cinematic, but deeply and persistently incorrect in the way that made the eye want to look away, and the hindbrain want to file an objection. Vergil was standing 3 meters from it, the Yamato drawn, and the blade was resonating. Not vibrating physically, but radiating the clean, precise energy of a dimensional tool recognizing a dimensional problem. The cutting edge finding the boundary it was built to address. Vera was at the equipment bank to his left, running readings with the focused urgency of someone whose data had just changed in ways that required immediate reassessment. Nero was positioned between Vergil and the focal point, with Red Queen drawn and Devil Trigger burning at low ready. The stance of someone who had decided his job was to be the last line between his uncle and whatever was making that sound. Good instincts, Dante thought. The sound intensified as Dante and Alucard reached the lower level, resolving now from vibration into something closer to language, or the structural skeleton of language, the pattern and rhythm of meaning without the specific content, the way music carried emotion before lyrics carried words. It moved through the air of the basement with the resonant authority of something that was not asking for attention, but commanding it. And Alucard stopped. Not the tactical stop, not the predatory stillness. A full stop. Both feet, coat settling, the quality of motion draining out of him entirely the way water drains from a vessel. His red eyes were fixed on the focal point, with an expression that Dante had not seen on his face in the 8 hours since he'd arrived in this universe. Not theatrical, not analytical, and not the reading quality, or the honest smile, or the genuine delight at being needed. Recognition. "You know what that is?" Dante said. Not a question. "I know what it's trying to sound like," Alucard said very quietly. "Which is?" "Me," Alucard said. The focal point pulsed. The dimensional wound widened by a degree that Vera's equipment registered immediately. 3 separate alarms activating in sequence. Her hands moving across the instrument panel with the speed of someone whose 11 years of preparation had just been stress tested. "It's using the resonance," she said. Not looking up, her voice carrying the tight, controlled urgency of professional alarm management. His presence here created a specific frequency. The plug-in-the-hole effect I described. Something on the other side has been listening to that frequency for 6 hours, and it's learned to replicate it. It's using the imitation as a crowbar. "What's on the other side?" Nero asked. "I don't know," Vera said. "I might," Alucard said. Everyone looked at him. "In my universe," Alucard said, still in that quiet register that was the most genuinely unsettling version of his voice, because it was the most stripped down, the most absent of performance. "There are things that feed on vampires, not by killing them, Killing a vampire in my universe is sufficiently difficult that most predators don't attempt it. By mimicking them, by learning the frequency of what a vampire is, the particular resonance of a consciousness that has existed long enough to accumulate the weight it accumulates, and using that frequency as a lure. He looked at the focal point. They're patient. They're very, very patient. And when a vampire crosses a dimensional boundary, they follow the resonance trail like a scent. You led it here? Vergil said. I led it to the door, Alucard said. It found the door open. The focal point tore, not catastrophically, not the full rupture that Vera's worst-case modeling had projected, the kind that would have rewritten Redgrave's geography. A controlled tear, the width of a doorway, the geometry of it deeply and deliberately wrong in a way that was distinct from the wound's passive deterioration. This was intentional. This was entrance architecture. Something on the other side had spent 6 hours learning the frequency of this universe's dimensional weak point and Alucard's specific resonance signature, and had built a door out of the combination. What came through was not large. This was its first surprise. Dante had been calibrating for large. Large was the DMC standard for things that required full engagement. What came through the tear was approximately human-sized, human-shaped in the loose, approximate way that things which weren't human sometimes achieved human shape when it was convenient. It was dark, not shadow dark, not the rich, living darkness of Alucard's power, but a flat, absorptive dark, the darkness of something that took in light and gave nothing back. It had Alucard's face, not a perfect copy, close, but the way a reflection in moving water was close. The coat was wrong, the glasses were absent, the smile it wore was the full one but inverted somehow, carrying the shape of the expression without the content that gave Alucard's version its particular quality. It stood in the torn focal point and looked at Alucard with eyes that were the right color but the wrong depth, flat where his were bottomless. Oh, Dante said. That's unsettling. Deeply, Nero agreed. From the position he had not moved from, Red Queen still up. Vergil had not moved either. He was looking at the thing with the Yamato held at the precise angle that said he had already calculated the cut and was waiting for the correct moment to execute it. Or his eyes moved between the imitation and Alucard, with the expression of someone reading a comparison and finding the original considerably more coherent than the copy. The imitation spoke. In Alucard's voice, close, the same way the face was close, and said, in the particular cadence of someone performing a script they'd learned phonetically without fully grasping its meaning. This universe is suitable. We will establish here. We, Alucard said. The tear widened by another degree. Behind the imitation, in the dimensional space between the focal point and wherever it had originated, shapes moved. The same flat darkness, multiple instances, the patient geometric patience of things that had waited a long time for a door to open. Dante looked at Alucard. How many? How many what? How many of those things came through your universe before you left? Alucard was quiet for 1 second. They don't exist in fixed numbers, he said. They divide. When they find a suitable environment, they establish, as it said. And then they grow. He looked at the shapes moving in the dimensional space behind the imitation. I would estimate the current incursion at between 15 and 40 distinct instances, with growth rate dependent on available energy sources. Energy sources like? Nero asked. Souls, Alucard said. Demonic energy, divine power, the denser the energy environment. He looked around the basement at the focal point, at Red Grave above them with its Qliphoth-saturated atmosphere, at 3 of the most powerful beings in this universe standing in a room together. The faster they establish, So, Red Grave is ideal conditions, Dante said. Red Grave, Alucard said, is a buffet. The imitation took a step forward. The shapes behind it began moving with the collective, purposeful coordination of things acting on a shared signal. Vera's equipment was registering the energy drain already, the focal point being used as both entrance and fuel source, the dimensional wound widening incrementally with each passing second. Vergil moved first. The Yamato came up and across in the clean, economical arc of a cut aimed not at the imitation, but at the tear itself. At the dimensional boundary the incursion was using, at the Yamato's edge finding the geometry of the wound and pressing against it the way a hand presses against a cut to slow bleeding. The blade resonated, loudly, physically, the sound of dimensional logic being applied to a dimensional problem. And the tear stopped widening, held. The imitation looked at Vergil with its flat, wrong eyes. Then it looked at Alucard. Then it looked at Alucard again, with the quality of something recalculating, something that had built its entire strategy around the assumption of what Alucard was and was now confronting data that didn't fit the model. Because Alucard was walking toward it, not running, not with weapons drawn or shadows deployed or the full architectural display of his power, walking with the unhurried certainty of something that had decided the distance between itself and the problem was the only thing requiring correction. His coat moved in that sourceless wind. His red eyes were the ones with depth, bottomless, centuries deep, the weight of every soul he'd ever consumed moving behind them like weather behind glass. "You learn my frequency," Alucard said to the imitation, conversationally. 6 hours of listening and you learn to replicate it well enough to open a door. He stopped 4 feet from the thing. That's actually impressive, in a very limited way. He tilted his head. But here's what you missed. The imitation waited. Behind it, the shapes pressed against the held boundary of the tear, pushing against the Yamato's resistance with the collective weight of numbers. "Well, you learned what I sound like," Alucard said. "You didn't learn what I am." The shadows came, not deployed, released. The distinction was everything. Everything Alucard had been managing since he arrived in this universe. The careful throttling of what he actually was in deference to a situation that had required something more surgical than his full self. The choice to engage at a level that left room for conversation and assessment, and the productive application of curiosity, all of it stepped aside. What remained was not theatrical, was not performed, was the thing that had existed for over 500 years and had absorbed nearly 4 million souls and had passed through death and come back from it and had decided, in the specific personal philosophical reckoning that only beings of sufficient age and experience could conduct. That it existed not because it was allowed to, but because it chose to. The basement became, briefly, somewhere else. The imitation had time to register that the frequency it had spent 6 hours learning was not the frequency of a vampire. It was the frequency of something that wore vampirism the way some things wore coats. As a choice, as an aesthetic, as the outermost layer of something considerably more fundamental underneath. Dante had his weapons up and was moving without having consciously decided to move. The Sparda blood responding to a power output level that bypassed rational threat assessment and went straight to the animal layer, the deep layer, the layer that said large thing, move. Nero was in full devil trigger, the transformation coming without the usual buildup, instant and total. The power responding to the environment, and the way a pressure valve responded to pressure. Vergil held the Yamato at the tear with both hands, the blade singing with effort, the dimensional boundary trying to collapse under the pressure from the other side, while simultaneously being compressed by the pressure from this side, as Alucard's released power filled the basement, like a tide finding its level. The imitation dissolved. This was not a fight. Calling it a fight would have required the imitation to have had some agency in the outcome. It encountered Alucard's full self and ceased to be a coherent entity. The flat darkness that had composed it scattered, reaching for the tear, for the shapes behind it, for any exit from the radius of what Alucard was currently being. Alucard looked at the tear, at the shapes pressing through it, at the dimensional wound that had been widening incrementally for 2 years and was currently being held by Vergil and the Yamato, and Vergil's extraordinary refusal to acknowledge the concept of being overwhelmed. "Vergil," Alucard said. "Now would be acceptable," Vergil said through his teeth, in the tone of someone who had decided that acknowledging difficulty was permissible when accuracy required it. "When you cut it," Alucard said, "cut inward, toward me." He spread his arms slightly, the gesture of someone making themselves a target, doing it with complete deliberate intention. "The frequency they followed here is mine. If you seal the boundary with my resonance inside the cut, the seal carries my signature. Anything that followed me through, or tries to follow after, gets sealed against your frequency," Vergil said, once the calculation completed instantly. "Permanently locked out." "You'd be using yourself as the seal," Dante said. "I'm already the plug," Alucard said. "This is just making it permanent." He looked at Dante with those bottomless red eyes in the darkness that was also him. There was also the shadows, and the depth, and the something older than the rules. "It also means I stay. The seal requires a continuous anchor, a living resonance source." The honest smile, the small one. "The universe needs me here. Specifically, functionally." Dante looked at him for 1 second. Then he looked at the tear, at the shapes massing behind it, at Vergil holding the boundary with the Yamato, and the particular quality of determination that was Vergil's version of everything he had. "Do it," Dante said. Vergil cut inward. The Yamato's cut was perfect. It was always perfect. Perfection was not an aspiration for Vergil, but a standard, the minimum acceptable outcome of any action he committed to. And in this moment, with the dimensional tear pressing against the blade and the shapes behind it, massing with the collective urgency of things that had waited a long time for a door and were now watching it close, he gave the cut everything the blade was capable of. And then he gave it everything he was capable of, which was the thing that made the difference. The blade moved inward, and Alucard's power moved with it. Not guided, not pulled, choosing to follow the cut the way a river chose to follow a channel, because the channel was correct and the river understood correct when it encountered it. The dimensional boundary folded around the resonance the way a wound sealed around a suture. Not painlessly, not cleanly in the aesthetic sense, but with the deep structural rightness of repair work done at the correct depth with the correct instrument. The shapes behind the tear had one moment of collective, unified response. A pressing, a surging. The full weight of however many instances had massed in the dimensional space between the focal point and their origin, throwing themselves at the closing boundary with the desperation of things that understood what a sealed door meant for their established timeline. They hit the boundary as Vergil completed the cut. The cut completed. The tear sealed. The sound it made was not dramatic. A sound like a very large book closing. The soft, definitive compression of something that had been open becoming closed. Of a question becoming an answer. Of a wound that had been getting worse for 2 years becoming a scar. Vera's equipment registered the change across every monitoring system simultaneously. Alarms cutting off mid-cycle as the readings dropped from crisis to baseline, and then continued dropping past baseline to something her instruments had no prior data point for. A dimensional stability reading for the red grave focal point, that was not merely healed, but reinforced. The sealed boundary carrying a resonance that her software assessed, after a moment of processing, as self-sustaining, continuous, anchored to living source. She stared at the reading for 3 seconds. Then she looked at Alucard. Alucard was standing where he had been when the cut completed. Arms lowered now, the released power drawing back in the way a tide drew back, the basement reasserting its own geometry as the something older than the rules settled back into the coat and the glasses and the red eyes and the careful architecture of a being that had decided a long time ago what shape it wanted to occupy. The shadows retreated. The sourceless wind stilled. The blue emergency lighting reclaimed the room incrementally, and in its returning illumination, Alucard looked, for the first time since he had fallen through the rift at Vester and Crone, like something that had arrived where it was going. Not where it had intended to go, where it was going. The distinction, for something old enough to understand the difference, was everything. Vergil sheathed the Yamato. He looked at his hand, the hand that had held the blade through the cut, with the expression of someone noting a physical data point. His palm was marked faintly with a resonance burn, the dimensional equivalent of a callus, the record of having held something larger than the blade while the blade did its work. He closed his hand, filed it, moved on. Nero let Devil Trigger drop with the exhale of someone releasing 3 hours of sustained readiness and rolled his shoulders and looked around the basement with the comprehensive assessment of someone confirming that the immediate crisis had resolved before allowing himself to think about anything else. The focal point was sealed. The imitation was gone. The shapes that had masked behind the tear were on the wrong side of a permanent door, and the room smelled like ozone and old copper and something else. Something that had no name in this universe's chemistry vocabulary, the olfactory record of dimensional work done at scale. "Is it over?" Nero asked. "The incursion is over," Vera said, still looking at her readings with the focused intensity of someone cross-checking data against expectation. "The dimensional wound is sealed. The resonance anchor is..." She paused, selecting her words. "Stable. Continuous. As long as the anchor remains present and active, the seal holds." "And if the anchor leaves?" Dante asked. Vera looked at Alucard. "The seal degrades over approximately 48 hours, she said, after which the wound reopens, smaller than before but present. And the things that followed him here will have been waiting for exactly 48 hours on the other side." She paused. "They are patient." "I know," Alucard said. The basement processed this collectively. The specific silence of a group of people absorbing an operational reality that had just rearranged several assumptions. Dante leaned against the equipment bank with his arms crossed and looked at Alucard with the expression he used for problems that were also undeniably solutions, and solutions that were also undeniably problems. "So," Dante said. "So," Alucard agreed. "You're staying." "The universe needs me here," Alucard said. "Specifically, functionally." The small, honest smile. "You'll recall I found that novel." "I recall," Dante said. "I also recall that 20 minutes ago, you released enough power to make my Sparda blood file a formal complaint, and that was against a copy. The things behind that door are not a copy," Alucard said. "No, they're not." He looked at the sealed focal point, at the scar in the air where the tear had been, barely visible now. A subtle wrongness that would fade further over time as the resonance anchor did its continuous quiet work. They will find other doors, other resonance trails. This universe has. He looked up, through the ceiling, toward Red Grave above them, and the demon-saturated atmosphere, and the Qliphoth scars, and all of it. The whole complicated, violent, improbable city. Considerable dimensional porousness. They are patient and they are numerous, and they will try again. Then we'll handle it again, Nero said, but with the flat pragmatic certainty of someone for whom this was simply the next item on a list that had always been long. Alucard looked at him, then at Vergil, then at Dante. Something moved through his expression, through all the layers of it, the theatrical and the analytical and the genuinely ancient. That was not quite any of the things that had been there before. Not the smile, not the reading quality, not the delight. Something quieter. Something that might, on a different face, have required a different vocabulary to describe. "You're not afraid of what's behind that door," Alucard said. It was not a question, and it was not approval, or it was both of those things simultaneously in the way that observations sometimes were. "We're never afraid of what's behind the door," Dante said. "That's kind of the whole thing." "Yes," Alucard said. "I'm beginning to understand that." He moved to the stairs, paused at the base of them, not hesitating, just marking the moment with the deliberateness of something that had lived long enough to understand that some moments were worth marking before you moved through them. "I'll need somewhere to stay," he said, to the room in general. "Somewhere with adequate structural integrity. The building I was on earlier no longer qualifies." "That's your fault," Nero said. "Partially," Alucard said. "I'd estimate 60-40. "The agency has space," Dante said, in the tone of someone who had made a decision and was going to own it. "The couch is occupied, but there's a back room that hasn't been used since Lady stopped keeping gear there." "I don't sleep on couches," Alucard said. "Yeah, the back room has a decent chair." "I don't sleep in chairs either." "What do you sleep in?" Alucard considered this. "A coffin, traditionally. But I've found over the centuries that the principle of the coffin is more important than the literal object. Dark, quiet, structurally sound." He paused. "The basement of your building will suffice." Dante looked at Vergil. Vergil looked back with the expression of someone who had processed the full implications of this arrangement, found them acceptable on operational grounds, and was declining to discuss his feelings about it. "Fine," Dante said. They came back up through the building, through the clean blue-lit lobby, past Vera's instrumentation arrays, out through the front entrance into the pre-dawn gray of Red Grave at 6 in the morning. The city was beginning its tentative re-engagement with daylight. The particular amber gray of early morning light moving across demon-scarred facades and rebuilt street fronts, and all the complicated architecture of a place that had survived too much and kept going anyway. Alucard stood on the front step and looked at it. At the skyline. At the light coming up behind the buildings to the east, painting the cloud cover in gradients of amber and rose that were, objectively, beautiful in the way that things were beautiful when they were happening in a place that had earned the right to have beautiful mornings. He said. "What?" Dante asked. "In my universe," Alucard said. "I don't watch sunrises. Occupational conflict of interest." He tilted his head at the lightening sky. "This universe has different rules." He watched the sunrise, for approximately 30 seconds, in the company of 3 men who had each, in their own way, made peace with being monsters, or had declined to make peace with it, which amounted to the same thing in terms of operational outcome. Alucard watched Redgrave's morning arrive. Then he put his glasses on, turned his coat collar up, and walked east into the city that the universe had decided he belonged to. The no-life king had arrived in Redgrave looking for something interesting. He had found, instead, something rarer, something necessary. 500 years of existence had taught Alucard that Interesting was abundant if you knew where to look. Necessary was the thing that came once in a very long time, if at all. He had become the seal on a wound between worlds. Anchor to a dimensional scar in a city that collected scars the way other cities collected history. Resident anomaly in a universe that ran on demonic and divine energy and had no taxonomy for what he was, which meant he got to write the entry himself. The Sparda brothers had not become his allies. That word implied a warmth and a mutuality that none of the three of them would have been comfortable with, and they had become something more honest. Fellow residents of a violent world who had looked at each other across a crater and arrived at the same assessment: useful, unpredictable, worth keeping track of. The things behind the sealed door were patient. They would find other resonances, other wounds, other doors. Redgrave's dimensional porousness was not a problem that one sealed focal point resolved permanently. There would be more nights like this one, more craters, more delegations, more meetings in buildings that didn't officially exist. Alucard found, as he walked east into the Redgrave morning, that he was not dreading this. He was, in the specific vocabulary of something that had lived long enough to know the difference, looking forward to it.